Hello, pen friends. Welcome back to another pen review video. Now, a couple things before I get started on this review. First of all, a huge thank you to Van Ness Pens who loaned the pen for this review. It was loaned free of charge. It will be returned to them when the review is finished. No additional compensation was provided to do this particular review, but I do need to call out that they are a sponsor of the Pen Habit website and some of my videos. So I do have a relationship with the Van Ness Pen Company, as I do with some of the other people who have provided pens. So I just want to be honest and upfront with everybody. All opinions expressed herein are my own, and I try very hard not to let them be influenced by that, but I always want to be upfront and honest with folks about it. Okay. Second thing, one of the most common questions I get from people in the pen community, and it's usually people who are new to the community and are just curious. They hear a lot about flex nibs. They want to try them out, but they always hear vintage flex nibs are so much better than modern. And the question is, why can't we, with all of our modern technology, recreate the vintage flex nib? Now, I have answered this question in a variety of different times in a variety of different formats. I'm not going to go into it here. The short version of the story is, I think it's a lot more difficult to do that than people realize. And even though within our small community of pen enthusiasts, flex nibs are of interest, I don't know that they are of wide enough interest to really do the research and overcome the hurdles of manufacturing that would cover the costs. Just a guess, but that's kind of my take on it. Now, earlier this year in 2017, Aurora, the Italian manufacturer Aurora, introduced a new flexible nib. They've been working on it for quite a while. They've gone through a lot of variations of metal alloys and nib shapes and flexibility and softness and that sort of thing, and they introduced this new flexible nib. From what I understand, it's a relatively complicated process. They only have a couple of nib meisters in-house who are able to actually do these nibs, adjust these nibs properly. So they aren't able to put out huge numbers of them, and they have limited the flexible nibs to a special edition Aurora 88. So it is the 88 Anniversario. Each month they come out with 188 in one color, and all of them have a flexible nib. So I believe in March it was blue. In April, it was red, and that's the one I'll be reviewing today. In May, it was yellow, and there will be one coming out sometime in June. I don't know what color it's going to be off the top of my head. I don't remember, but they'll be doing 188, one color a month with these flexible nibs. After these limited editions are done, it remains to be seen what will happen with the Aurora flexible nibs, but they have been very interesting to a lot of people in the community. They've gotten a lot of attention, and they are limited edition. So if it's something you want to try, the blues are basically gone. You can still find a few of the reds left. The yellows are still mostly available because they just recently came out, but these colors aren't going to stick around forever. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, let's get into the pen. Comes in this big box. If you've seen my reviews of Aurora pens, there's nothing really new here. Nice box. Comes with a bottle of ink. Comes with the pen. It's a piston filler, so you don't need a converter or a cartridge or any of that kind of stuff. And because this is an Aurora 88, I have already reviewed the 88 Soleil. If you want to see that and see all the measurements, you can check out the review of the 88 Soleil. But I do want to point out a few differences. The real reason for this review is to show you the nib, because that's what most people are interested in. So the pen comes in a resin, solid color resin. In this particular case, they've got a yellow gold finish. There are the limited edition numbers on the back, in this case, 78 of 188. A red section here, which is, this is different. Normally the sections are, and I'll show you on my Nebulosa, normally the sections are black. They have done the section in the same material as the body. I actually kind of like that. It has a 14 karat gold flexible nib. And you can see when you compare the two nibs how different the shape of the nib is. The 88 with the flexible nib, the tines are longer and narrower. The shoulders are a little bit narrower. The design stamped on the nib face is different. This design is like the old vintage Auroras. This is kind of the current design with a lot of scroll work on it. And I believe that the reason that they keep the more simplistic designs on the flexible nibs is all of that stamping and the scroll work and stuff can weaken the metal if you're going to be flexing it a lot. So it's better to play it safe than sorry. Has an ebonite feed, has the ink window, the same amazing piston filler that exists in all of the Aurora pens. That same weird feature that where the plunger on the end of the piston holds on to a little bit of ink in case you run out while you're writing. And you can twist the piston and get a little bit more ink out. So other than that, it is your basic Aurora 88. It's in a color instead of being, black or metal or that sort of thing. And it has the flex nib. So let's do a quick comparison of this measurements on this pen. And then I'm going to show you the flex nib because I'm sure that's what you're all interested in. Before I get into showing you any more of the flexibility of this nib, I will go on record as saying I don't know that I would feel comfortable calling this a flex nib for a couple of reasons. This doesn't have a ton of line variation, not like you would expect from a vintage wet noodle, for instance. It has some limitations that and the feel of the nib is more like a semi-flex. I've got some vintage semi-flex. This feels very similar to that. I'm going to show you a few comparisons for flexibility as well, so you can kind of see how a couple of other flexible and semi-flexible nibs on the market compare. But let's dive into the actual, what everyone is here to see, which is the flex. So here is kind of the figure 8 pattern. I'm going to go pretty slowly here, and I'll talk about that in just a second. This is about as comfortable as I feel going with the flexibility on this particular pen. You notice there's not a huge amount of line variation. There is some, and it's a nice down. I get it more on the down strokes if I go a little faster and don't push it quite so hard. But if I'm going to do a long, extended, slow downstroke, I lose a lot of that. So you'll notice up here, I got a lot of ink output on the down strokes, but they were fast downstrokes. So, just very like that. You can see that I get a lot of ink on the paper here. A lot of ink on the paper, but if I go slowly, for some reason, I don't get as much. That's unusual. I don't normally see that with flexible nibs. Usually you want to go a little bit slower because the ink flow has a hard time keeping up. I think there might be something with the surface tension of the ink. So if you're going to use this as a flexible nib for regular writing, where you want to put some line variation in your regular writing, I think this nib has actually done a really nice job with that. If you're expecting this to be super flexible to do something like Spencerian or copper plate calligraphy, this is not the right pen for you. You need something with a more flexible nib. Now, I understand that when Aurora was making these nibs and experimenting and trying to find the right combination of softness and flexibility and that sort of thing, spring back, they tried a nib that was a little bit softer, a little more flexible, but found that it was springing too often. People were springing the nib too often. And particularly in our modern world, I think that is a real danger because a lot of us did not grow up using flexible nibs. We're not familiar with how they feel. The tendency is to push them farther than they ought to go. So in order to counteract that and prevent from having a really bad experience from springing a nib for which you cannot get an easy replacement, they've dialed back some of the flexibility and the softness of the nib. What you get is a nib that has a lot of snap back to it. It gives you I'm going to use the word feedback differently than I normally use it, but you get some feedback from the metal saying, hey, don't push me any further. This is as far as I want to go. That is something that a lot of modern flexible nibs don't do well. They don't give you the feedback. This snaps back very quickly. That is reminiscent of a vintage nib to me. What you don't get is the line variation, which is why I would say it feels a lot more like a vintage nib to me, but a vintage semi-flex nib, not a vintage flexible nib. Let me show you some quick comparisons of other kind of flexible, semi-flexible pens that are currently on the market right now. So this is the Pilot Custom Heritage 912 with the FA nib. So you'll notice I get quite a bit more line variation between the fine and the, this pen has been inked for a long time. I think the ink's starting to run a little low. But you can see I get a little bit more line variation. I do get, I need to clean this out and re-ink it. So don't read too much into that. That's not the problem with this particular one. So you can see I do get a little bit more line variation there. And then let me show you this additional pen. This is a custom pen that I got. I'm not going to show you much about it because I'm going to be doing another video, but I got a semi-flexible nib from fpnibs.com, and I had a keyhole breather hole drilled into the nib instead of just the round breather hole. And he markets this as a semi-flex nib. And there's some ink starvation, or not ink starvation, there's an ink flow issue going on here. If you want to see why, watch the bloopers at the end, because it's pretty funny. But in any case, you can see it gets really nice line variation, but it's pretty soft. I could see pushing this pretty easily beyond the point of springing it. So yeah, you get more line variation, but if you're not familiar with working with flexible nibs, this one could be a bit problematic. So in any case, the Aurora 88 the nib itself is a good nib, and the feed's good. It doesn't handle the flexing writing super well, especially if you go really slow, like I showed you. But if you're just writing regular cursive and you want to put some line variation on the downstrokes, then I think you're going to be absolutely fine. And I actually like it for that a lot. Now, the nib tip is very similar to Aurora's other nibs, where it's not super smooth. It has a lot of tooth to it. So this is going to be around a 4 on the smoothness scale. This is right on the edge of unpleasant. The feedback on this particular nib is just right on the edge of being unpleasant. So were this mine to keep, I absolutely would smooth the nib out a little bit. So overall, I would say that if you are one of those people who was expecting this to be, finally the modern recreation of the vintage wet noodle flex nib, you're going to be disappointed by this pen. But if you are looking for a daily writer with a flexible nib where you don't want to have to worry about very carefully, drawing every note or every word, but you can actually just write and get some line variation, I think this is a really neat entry into the market, and one that there really is not much comparison to. I think the closest one I could compare it to are the discontinued extra flexibile nibs from Omas. I would say that those are a little bit more flexible and a little softer. But these, I also know that those are prone to springing. Even I sprung one of those, and I've never really sprung a nib before. Well, I had one other time, but that was because I was being stupid and showing off, and I kind of suspected I was going to end up springing it when I tried what I tried. So that's a story for a different time. So these Aurora 88s list for around $650, and right now I'm not seeing a huge discount on them. They're selling for around $650. It is pretty pricey. The material is not the most interesting material in the world, but the nibs are really fun writers. The feeds behave nicely. They have for me with the couple of different inks that I've used, and I like them. Do I like it enough to go out and go crazy buying them? I don't know. I have enough other pens and vintage pens in my collection for flexible writing. Now, I do like a really nice cushioned writer. I like a pen with some give to it so I can have some line variation, because I do have kind of loopy cursive handwriting that is benefited by a softer nib. I would say that I think the material is not interesting enough for me to justify that price point, particularly as I have other pens with flexible nibs that are just as interesting in slightly different ways. But I have to say, I like the direction that Aurora is going here. I hope they continue to go in this direction. I hope they, at some point in the future, offer one of those softer nibs that they had tried as part of their earlier phase testing to the public and see what we think. I'd also like to see, if they do more of these, see a little bit more thought go into the feed to support some of the slower, wider nibbed calligraphy, so we can play, or wider nib tine spread, so we can play around with the calligraphy stuff a little bit more. So yeah, that is my review of the Aurora 88. The Aurora 88 Anniversario. This is the red one. Again, thank you to Van Ness Pens for loaning me this pen for review purposes. I appreciate it. It is getting rinsed out and sent back very shortly. So thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to stick around for a really fantastic outtake in just a little bit. We'll see you here next time on The Pen Habit. Bye. Now, I understand that when Aurora was putting this nib together, one of the things that they tried a bunch of different stuff, and they had a version that was softer and would give you a little bit more line variation, but it was more prone to springing. Excuse me. I've been sitting around for a couple days, so the feed I might need to prime. Oh, yeah, and I forgot that this was an eyedropper. Ugh. Wah, wah. Blooper reel. Gross. All right, I'm going to go wash my hands. Oh, damn it.